Hey everyone, my name's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my 5K Q&A video. So to celebrate 5,000 subscribers, I asked you all what kind of video you would want to see from me from a poll of different ideas. And while I'm going to do all of those videos from all of those ideas, one of the things that you all did request was a Q&A. So I asked in a couple different areas for questions that you all wanted to ask me and that I would answer. So you guys submitted so many questions and I want to thank you so much for your questions because it's just awesome that anyone cares what these answers are, so thank you. If you submitted a question, thank you. So, first of all, a lot of people were asking, where I'm from, where I live, what I do for work. So let me just start with the basics and give you my life story. I was born and raised in Orlando, Florida, and for international friends, I will have a map of the US pointing to the different states that I am from or living in or whatever. And I lived in Orlando, Florida until I was 11 years old. When I was 11, my whole family and I moved to Tokyo, Japan. That was for my dad's job. My dad has worked for Disney pretty much since I was born. He still works for Disney, so Disney gave him this opportunity to work in the Tokyo Disneyland parks, so he definitely took it. We were all so excited, and so I lived in Tokyo from 11 to 18 years old. I went to an international school there. The school was called the American School in Japan. Very creative, and I attended all of my middle school and high school years at that school. I loved Japan so much. I would go back in a heartbeat if I had the opportunity to. I was actually supposed to take my husband there this year on vacation. We were planning to go back in March, and then coronavirus hit and we had to cancel and reschedule and go somewhere else. So that was a big bummer because I really wanted to show him Tokyo, but someday when all of this is over, I will go back to Japan and show him Japan. So after graduating high school, I moved back to the States. My parents were still in Japan, but I moved back to the States for college and I went to the University of Georgia. Here is Georgia. So go Dogs. If anyone follows colleges, go Dogs. And at the University of Georgia, I studied international business and management information systems. So that is what I graduated with. That is what my degree is in. And then after graduating from the University of Georgia, I went to work for 6 months as a part of the Disney College program at Walt Disney World, where I was a character performer. Best time of my life. And after I finished the Disney College program, I moved to Madison, Wisconsin. Here is Wisconsin, where I started a job at a company that does healthcare software. I'm still at that company today. I am a project manager for them. And basically I'm in charge with going into hospitals, implementing this software and making it work for different healthcare organizations. So that is my current job, but I no longer live in Madison, Wisconsin. I actually moved 2 years ago to Nashville, Tennessee. So here's where Tennessee is, and here is where I still remain. And I work from home most weeks, unless I'm traveling for work to my customer, so to the hospital that I'm working at. Obviously, we're not traveling right now because of everything going on. So I've just been working from home pretty much this whole year. So that is my job, where I'm from, where I've lived. I think I've covered all of that. So if you have any other questions on any of that, maybe they're already asked and we'll get into it. And you can always ask me in the comments if I don't answer any of your questions. So now getting into your questions, and I think I covered some of them. So if I did, I'll kind of skip around because that was a long intro. So Mia asked, do you prefer hardcover or paperbacks? I prefer reading from paperbacks, especially when I'm traveling for work, which I'm not doing right now. So, but I like owning hardcovers for my collections. So I'm trying to buy more hardcover books, but if I have to buy paperbacks, I'm not upset about it because I actually prefer reading from a paperback. Sarah asked about my life outside of BookTube. So I kind of went over that, where I live in Nashville. We're not doing too much right now because everything's pretty much shut down still in Nashville. She also asked about pets. I have 2 dogs that I love dearly. We actually got our second dog as a puppy. We got both dogs as puppies from a little local rescue place, and we got our second dog actually this year back in April, and figured it was a good time for a puppy because we were going to be home all the time. We had all of our attention on it, so it worked out. The favorite place I've visited, so besides Japan, because Japan just has my whole heart, I will say I think the coolest city I've ever been to is Singapore. That city just is like the future. Like, it's like you're stepping into the future. It's so bizarre. So I love Singapore, and if you've seen Westworld season 3 especially, I think it's all shot in Singapore, and that just makes sense to me because they're trying to make it look like a futuristic city, and that's what Singapore looks like. So I think the coolest city I've been to is Singapore, but like my favorite place to go to I think is Thailand. I've been to Thailand several times. I went for school because I was a part of like a Habitat for Humanity kind of organization. So we would go and help build like a cafeteria for like a school, or we would help build a classroom or something like that. So I've been to Thailand a couple times for that, and then just for vacations because it was so close to Japan, and it's just an incredible place. I love Thailand so much. The culture, the beautiful architecture, it's gorgeous. So definitely I would say Thailand, I think, but there are so many great places. Then where I'd like to visit, so I've always had this fascination with Morocco. Ever since I was little, for some reason, Morocco just, like the architecture, the colors, the vibrancy of it, the culture, there's everything about Morocco is so different from what I've been exposed to in my life, and I would just love to see it in person. Morocco, I think, is probably the top of my list. So once all of this passes over, this pandemic, hopefully I'll eventually be able to go to Morocco. Kristen asks, does my husband read? He does, yes. He is not quite as voracious of a reader, but he does read quite a bit. I've actually been kind of forcing him to read some of my favorites. So he's read the whole Scythe series at this point. He's read The Martian, he's read Vicious by V.E. Schwab, but he actually prefers more classics. So his favorite book is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, which I've tried to read, and I was fine, but it was not my taste. So we definitely have different tastes in our books, but it's fun to see his reactions to reading some of my favorites as well. So he's a good sport about it. He'll try anything. And then Kristen also asked, do I read more than one book at a time? Yes, but it's usually where I'm listening to one audiobook while I'm physically reading another book, so it's easy to keep track of them. Alicia asks, what is my guilty pleasure? And I'm not sure if this is a guilty pleasure book or just like hobby in general. I'm gonna say, I don't know that I have a guilty pleasure book. I'm really like not ashamed of like any of the books that I read. So I don't think I have a good answer. And it's the kind of same thing with hobbies. Like I don't really watch a lot of TV. Like I loved watching like Love is Blind on Netflix, was just so bingeable. So maybe that's like a guilty pleasure kind of TV show that I watched, but that's all I really got. And then Corey asks, what is my favorite non-fantasy book? So I will do a favorites of all time video soon, going over my favorite fantasy books of all time and then my favorite like non-fantasy books. But to give you a sneak peek, for the longest time, my favorite non-fantasy book was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I just thought it was the most stunning, sad book I've ever read. It stuck with me for so long. But recently, last year, I read another book that finally topped it, and that was Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky, which has so many mixed reviews online. I loved it. I don't care what anyone else says. I love it. I think it's perfection. So good. So this is my favorite non-fantasy book for right now. When and how did you get into reading? So I think I've always been a reader. Ever since I was in elementary school, I participated in what's called an accelerated reader program, where you got certain points and you were competing with classmates to read the most. And I'm a very competitive person, so the minute you put reading into this like competitive space, I wanted to be number one. I was like, I have to be first place every month in my accelerated reader program. So I was reading all the time. I started reading with like Babysitter's Club, Magic Tree House books. Any of those I was a huge fan of. The Boxcar Kids, is that another one? Yeah, I think. So all of those I loved, but I've always been a reader. I think I stopped in middle school and high school when I was in Japan, just because there was not really a lot of downtime. I was always go, go, go. But then I started reading again, kind of at the end of college. And yeah, I've always been a reader. Bren of Clay asked, do you believe in cryptids? So things like Bigfoot, Yeti. I actually looked at this up. So it's like the Yeti, the Sasquatch, like Bigfoot. I think Sasquatch is Bigfoot, right? And Loch Ness Monster and all of that. I don't believe in those things, but it's probably because I have never watched any of those shows that, try to expose them or anything. So I could be convinced otherwise. But I do believe in ghosts. What do you do for work? I already answered that. Healthcare software. Do you read while you are writing your own work? I am not writing anything. I was writing for a while, a couple years ago, but I've just stopped. I've been enjoying reading so much and doing this booktube thing that I have no desire to write my own stuff right now. Maybe that will come again later in life, but yeah, no, I'm not writing anything. What book will you recommend for new fantasy readers? I am going to do a whole video on like the beginners into fantasy kind of books. But as a first book for new fantasy readers, I'm gonna say Vicious by V.E. Schwab, just because this is very low fantasy. It's not heavy on world building or anything like that. It's much more about, it's kind of like reminiscent of X-Men, if X-Men were all morally gray, corrupt characters that you didn't know whether you should root for or not. I love Vicious. This is one of my favorite books of all time, for sure. So I think this is a really good one if you just like want to dip your toes into fantasy, but don't want like the epicness quite yet. Ashley Mass asked, are you married? If so, how did you guys meet? Yes, I am married. I actually got married almost a full year ago. It is almost our 1-year anniversary, July 26th. And we met at our first day at work. So we work for the same company. We started at the same time at this healthcare software company, and we were standing in line next to each other, like waiting to get our pictures taken for our little profiles, and just started talking. And then we were in the same friend group for a while, and it just happened from there. So first day of work, yay. How old are you and when did you start reading fantasy? I am 27 years old. I am turning 28 on September 14th, very soon. I started reading fantasy since I can remember. It started kind of with the Magic Tree House, Harry Potter, all of that. So just when I was little, I was always loving fantasy. Dun Pixie asked, why did you start your channel? I started my channel because I have no one in my real life to talk about books with, and I just wanted to talk about books because, as you can see, I love them. So that is why I started my channel. My favorite audiobooks. Good question. I love Daisy Jones and the Six is excellent, and Sleeping Giants. So far, those are my two favorite audiobooks because they have a whole cast of characters that narrate every different perspective that you're reading from, and I love it. They really enhance the reading experience, I think. My favorite type of music. I love me some classic rock. That is my go-to. I just always switch on a classic rock station or playlist, but I also really like the epic kind of soundtrack music, like Audio Machine, any of that. I love, if a song sounds like it should be in an epic fantasy movie trailer, that's my song. I love that kind of music as well. If there was a third Six of Crows book, would you read it? Yeah. For sure. I love fantasy, but due to lack of time, I prefer standalones. Any recommendations? So I don't know if you're referring to standalone fantasy recommendations or just standalones in general, but I have one of both. So I'm going to recommend The Nightingale, not Imaginary Friend, because I think The Nightingale will appeal to more people than Imaginary Friend would. So that is why I'm going to recommend The Nightingale for your non-fantasy standalone. Then for your fantasy standalone, I'm going to recommend Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson because this is standalone right now. I think a sequel may come out in years down the road, but he wrote this to be a standalone, so you can just read this whole story and get everything you want from it, and I love it. It's one of my favorites. Highly recommend. What are two books you hold dear to your heart and why? We already talked about those, but I will also add into the mix of my favorites, obviously Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, because this is my favorite fantasy series of all time so far, so I'm a huge Sanderson fan. If you haven't already guessed that, I'm gonna also add into that imaginary friend mix, Way of Kings. I love this question. Do you ever dream of books or book series that don't exist? Yes, because especially when I was writing my own books, I was always trying to think of new ideas and come up with new worlds and characters. So I still sometimes will do that and think of these grandiose ideas in my mind and then just not be able to write them. I definitely, yes, do that. Which book will you save if you have all the books on fire? Pick only one. No, I won't do it. Fine, if you're gonna make me. I really do want to say Imaginary Friend, but I think just for rereadability, I'm gonna say Way of Kings. I feel like every time I would reread this, I would get something new from it, and I just love that it's humongous and has some of my favorite characters in it of all time. So I'm gonna say Way of Kings. Jasmine's Bookcase asks, what are some of your favorite horror novels? Honestly, I do want to get more into horror because I haven't read nearly enough, but again, Imaginary Friend. Yeah, this is my favorite book and favorite horror novel. It's horror, if you didn't know. And I'm going to also say The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, The Shining by Stephen King. But I don't have a whole lot yet, so I definitely need to read more horror books, and then I want to do a whole horror recommendation video. I'm just not quite there yet. Books with V asks, will you attempt to read the Wheel of Time series? I have attempted. I tried reading The Eye of the World, and I got through it, but with a lot of difficulty. I did not like it at all. So I think maybe eventually I will try to reread it. But for right now, I have no interest in continuing on with that series. I'm curious to see the TV show though. I would like to see if I enjoyed the TV show, and maybe that will reinvigorate my interest in trying to reread the book and continue on with the series. She also asked, what are some of the difficulties you have had while on BookTube? I would say, to get content, you have to read a lot. So keeping up with, reading a lot so that I have content to put out. And that's not anyone telling me I have to do that. It's just myself putting pressure on myself. Another thing I really want to do more of is reading challenges. So I've done a couple so far where I've read like the lowest rated books on my TBR and filmed my real-time reactions to reading that. And that was one of my favorite videos to watch back because I was just cracking up. Oh my God, I did not have a good time reading some of those books. I had a lot of ranting in that video. So that was so much fun to do. I would love to do more of that, but it just requires me to read a lot of books. So I just have to find the time and find the right books to read for those challenges. But I do want to do more of that. And is there any particular genre you'll steer clear of? Really? Only poetry? I feel like I don't get poetry, I just don't understand it. That's the only one I could think of. Would you want all production of new books to stop if it meant you could catch up on your entire TBR? Wow. Okay, so clarification here. Would all production of new books stop just like for me? Like, would it only affect me? Because I would hate to stop it for other people who like want new books to come out. But for me, that would be awesome. If it was just affecting myself, like somehow I didn't have access to any new books, then yes, because I have so many backlist books I have to get through and I'm dying to get to. So maybe just for me, it would stop after Rhythm of War. I would get Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, and then all new books would stop for me, but I wouldn't want to stop it for anybody else. OG Garbage Tea asks, I love your username, it makes me laugh. Did someone convince you to start a YouTube account? No, I actually didn't really tell anyone in my real life that I was even starting it, besides like my husband and my mom. So yeah, no one convinced me. I just wanted to do it to talk about books. Who is your favorite Stormlight Archive character? I think after reading Oathbringer, it's Dalinar, but I still love Kaladin, and Shallan I'm not as in love with, but I definitely still really like her character. It's just Dalinar is such an awesome character. Oh my God. Do you ever plan on reading the Gentleman Bastard series? Yes, I would love to. I've heard amazing things about that series. What is your go-to alcoholic drink? Ooh, I love a good margarita, and it's like freshly made. Oh, man, a good margarita is the best. And my favorite NFL team, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, so I'm gonna have to say the Tennessee Titans. Tighten up. What are your thoughts on translated fiction? I've been getting into East Asian fantasy and have been loving it. I would love to do that, especially like I love Japan, obviously. So yes, if you have any recommendations for me for translated fiction, leave them down below, but I can also go look it up myself. I would love to get more into translated fiction, especially fantasy. You know, I've read some, like Frederick Bachman I've read the Stieg Larsson series. I'm reading the Witcher now, so I know all of that's translated, but I'd love to get even more into it, and especially like East Asian. Like I haven't read, I don't think, any translated fiction from like Korean, Chinese, Japanese authors, so that would be great. What was life like in Japan when you lived there? Do you speak the language, and what brought you to Japan? So Dad's job brought me to Japan. What was life like? As a kid, it was awesome because Japan is really, really safe. Like I felt very safe living there. You definitely see like little kids riding the trains by themselves, walking down the street by themselves, which we really don't do in the US. That's like a no-no. So it was really awesome having so much more independence as like teenager to just go out and do things with friends without having to worry about, you know, car rides and having a license and stranger danger and all of that. Like it was awesome having all of that independence. So I loved living in Japan. Oh my God, I just loved it. Learning about a different culture at that age, especially when it really shifts your whole world perspective, it definitely changed me for the better, for sure. Do I speak the language? I did take Japanese all while I was there, and by my senior year of high school, I was pretty darn good at Japanese. Unfortunately, not a lot of people speak Japanese in Tennessee and Georgia, so I didn't have a really great opportunity to practice and speak Japanese after leaving Japan, so I lost a ton of it. But man, if there is a way I could practice my Japanese, I would love to get back into it because it was so nice being able to speak another language. How old are you? 27. What made you love reading? Reading good books as a little kid is what made me love reading. Who's my favorite author? Sanderson. I think Sanderson for fantasy so far, and I'm gonna say Kristen Hanna for anything like non-fantasy so far. If you could go back in time, what book would you put into your middle school hands? Ooh, I think I would put, you know, something like Shadow and Bone or Aragon or something like that was perfect for that age reader that would just inspire so much love for the fantasy genre and just make me so into reading more of it. Those are like great gateway books for younger readers, I feel like, into epic fantasy. So yeah, I think those. What book do you still love that you know is almost purely for nostalgia factor? Probably Harry Potter. How was working at Disney? Oh man, I loved it so much. I would work there my whole life if I lived there. Yeah, it was awesome. So as a character performer, you're not allowed to say that you were the character because the character is the character. So you had to say you were friends with the character. So I was friends with Chip and Dale and Winnie the Pooh. And how you get selected for characters is based on your height. That's pretty much it. It's all based on height. I'm 5'4", so if I had been, 5'1", I would have been friends with Mickey, Minnie, Donald, like all of those. But I'm 5'4", so I was kind of in that in-between where I was Chip and Dale were my primary characters, and then Winnie the Pooh I got to do a lot. And then just above me was Pluto. Like I was just too short to be Pluto, but that would have been a fun one to be as well. I loved it. I got to work at all the parks, and how it works, I think there's a misconception out there. A lot of people ask me if there's fans in the suits. There are no fans. And I was in Florida, like in the summer, it was so hot. So how it works is when you start your day, you get your costume and you also get changes of clothes that Disney provides you because you sweat through your clothes every shift, and you're only like on your shift for 20 minutes, and then you have a break for 20 to 30 minutes, and then you're back on. And during your break, you change into a new set of clothes because you're so sweaty. But there was a lot of downtime where I was reading a lot and writing a lot. It was so much fun. I think my favorite shifts were the ones where I got to walk around a lot. So at parks like Hollywood Studios, you kind of get to walk around a little bit more than at some of the other parks like Magic Kingdom. Also really liked doing dining shifts where you got to do character dinings. I got to do a lot as Winnie the Pooh at Crystal Palace. If you like know Disney, you know what I'm talking about. And then I got to do a lot as Chip and Dale at a resort and at a restaurant in the park, and it was really fun. So I loved doing it. I would do it forever if I could. It was the best. The hardest part though was the autograph, because you have these big gloves on that you have to like hold the pen in, and I felt so bad for some of the kids that would come up for my autograph, because some of them it was so poorly done. So I got better and better at it, but my first shift, I feel so bad for that kid that has that first shift autograph because it was god awful. If you guys have questions, I would totally do a whole video on my experience because it was the best time of my life. Okay, this is a really long video already, so I'm only going to ask a couple more questions, and then maybe I can do a part 2 if I didn't answer your question in this video. Maybe if you're interested, let me know if you're interested in a part 2 of this, and we can talk about some more questions and answers. That'd be fun. What genres of literature do you dislike reading but don't mind or flat out actually enjoy watching movies or TV shows in that genre, and vice versa? For example, I really don't like reading mystery thriller or contemporary books, but I do like watching the movies or the TV series in these genres. I actually have an answer for this because I recently tried to read Red Sparrow, which is like an espionage thriller about CIA agents and like double KGB agent spies and all this. And I did not like the book because it got too deep into like CIA talk, but I really, really want to see that movie because I love spy thrillers. So I feel like I'm not a good like espionage thriller reader, but I love watching those movies. And then vice versa, anything I don't like watching, I have to say, fantasy is so hit or miss for me. I think the fantasy movies and TV shows that do it right, I love. Like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, they did it right with the biggest budgets, and it was spectacular watching those fantasy stories come to life. But I've been noticing that since Game of Thrones had such success, there have been so many TV shows coming out recently that are trying to kind of duplicate that success and are fantasy shows and are not doing it right. So things like Cursed just came out on Netflix, and I'm not a huge fan. I only watched the first episode, but I wasn't a huge fan. I thought it was just a little too, it looked low budget. I don't know. And then The Witcher, I know a lot of people love that TV show, but I just was not a huge fan of the TV show and how it depicted the books. I liked that it stayed close to the books, but man, reading it and interpreting it yourself and seeing these images in your mind makes it so much more fun than seeing a lower budget or just a not perfect visual depiction of it. I don't know. So I gotta say it's hard with fantasy because it requires so much budget and so much scope, and if you don't do it right, it just turns out kind of corny, if that makes sense. So if any of you have amazing fantasy shows or movies that you would recommend that I didn't list off, let me know, because when it's done right, I love it, but I've been finding that a lot of it's not done right. And then, okay, I'll make this the last one. How do you manage to read so many books so quickly? I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and there are some months with my job where I'm doing a lot of tedious kind of spreadsheet work where it's very easy to plug in an audiobook and zone out in the audiobook when I don't have to like actively be thinking about the work that I'm doing. So there are days where I can listen to an audiobook for 8 hours, and I listen to them on double speed, so I can get through a whole audiobook in a day if it's a good work day, if it's conducive to that. But then there are some months where I actively like am concentrating on the work I'm doing and not able to listen to audiobooks if that's the case. So it just depends on the month and like what I'm doing at work. But there are some months where if you're noticing I have like reading over like 10 books, it's because that month I was able to listen to a lot more audiobooks. That's how I managed to read so quickly. And luckily I like audiobooks. I know a lot of people don't love them, and I'm lucky that I can like concentrate and still get the story from them. Okay, I know I didn't get to everyone's questions, but I already have 45 minutes of footage, so I've got to edit this down to a normal number. So if you guys want to see a part 2, let me know. I'm so sorry if I didn't answer your question in this video, but if we do that part 2, I promise I will get to more questions and hopefully answer yours. And thank you all again so much for submitting your questions. This was so much fun to do. Hopefully that helps you get a better picture of me and who I am and my life story. And once again, thank you guys so much for 5,000 subscribers. You guys are awesome. You are what make this so much fun to do, and what makes me want to record more videos and do this, because I love interacting with you guys. So definitely leave your comments down below. If you have any other questions, I'll try to answer them in the comments. Yeah, if you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you aren't already subscribed. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday, and sometimes bonus videos like this one. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!